Welcome to the Europe and North America breakout session. My name is Emelie Weski. I will be your moderator and host for this session. I am a global focal point for the UN MGCY, also the Vice President of the National Council of Swedish Youth Organizations, and the podcast host of the Change Rebels podcast that is focusing on change and change making in youth, peace, and security. Alexandra Samotova, who is also a UN MGCY person, a regional focal point. She will be taking notes and also reporting back to the bigger session when we're completing this breakout. And together we will be stepping a little bit beyond the traditional framings of peace and offer ways forward towards a better normal, which is the title of today's panels. The first half, approximately, of this session, we will be hearing from 4 panelists, and after that we will open up to the group for questions, reflections, discussions. I really encourage your own personal statements as well, so that we will have a recording of that and take notes of that if you haven't had the chance to be on the panel. As I said, keep your microphones on mute. I will let you know when we will start having a more of an open table discussion. The aim for this session is to raise awareness about the importance of developing local, national, and regional narratives for youth, peace, and security. And for this group to come out with its own kind of regional call to action on North-South cooperation. And before we begin, I think just to summarize a little bit on the background of what peace actually looks like, so that we all have the same background knowledge about our region. In short, what we can say is that Europe and North America are both regions with a sort of with a story of dualism, peace in its traditional sense on one hand, but also a colonial past and systemic violence on the other hand on its own people. Since the World War II, Europe has experienced a relative peace, a period called Pax Europea, above all associated with the creation of the European Union. But however, after the Cold War, political, religious, and ethnic tensions have become much more evident, escalating in, for example, the Yugoslav wars in the 90s and various tensions with and within Russia. Nonetheless, in 2012, the EU did receive and was awarded with the prize, the Nobel Peace Prize. Meanwhile, in North America, Canada is indexed as the 6th most peaceful country in the world by the Global Peace Index. And the US has been, in the other extreme, at war 222 years out of 242 years since its declaration of independence in 1776. These two regions also have to come to terms with their own colonial past, as I mentioned, which keeps still today affecting the global South, and the systemic and structural violence in their own countries on their own people, where the recent Me Too movement, the Black Lives Matter movement, Fridays for Futures, March for Our Lives, which we already heard something from, and various land rights struggles by Native and Indigenous communities, and the protests right now in Belarus are all evidence of that systemic and structural violence. Recognizing that these protests are also stories about youth calling for and building peace. Recognizing that our countries do have problematic heritage in a global context. Our guest today will help us a little bit deconstruct what peace actually means to them and as our representatives of our region. What does local, regional, and decolonial approaches on youth, peace, and security mean in their regions, and how can we promote and support North-South relations? A big welcome to our 2 peace builders and 2 public servants, all of them youth activists. We'll start with Aniqah Zowmi. I hope I pronounced that correctly. You have multiple roles working in particular with girls' issues, youth inclusion in Canada. You're also a regional focal point for the United Nations Media Group of Children and Youth, and a youth advisor to the Canadian Commission for UNESCO. You have also served as a lead author for the UNESCO Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education and Peace for Sustainable Development's publication, a youth-led guide on preventing violent extremism through education. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are and what decolonizing peace means to you?
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Emelie. And I'm so glad that we have such an intimate group. So I hope that we'll be able to foster really good conversations here. So as Emelie has shared, my name is Aniqah Zowmi. I'm born and raised right here in Toronto, Ontario, also known as the unceded territory of the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. The indigenous groups who had this land stolen from them and are the original caretakers of the place that I call home. So I'm happy to share a little bit more about kind of the diverse swaths of experience that I bring, but I think a lot of it would be amiss for me not to kind of locate where I sit and who I am and what identities I hold. So I am a visible Muslim woman. I exist at multiple intersectional identities. I actually belong to a persecuted minority group in my parents' home country of Sri Lanka. And so a lot of these things were things that influenced my existence in Canada, regardless of whether or not I was explicitly aware of it growing up. So I, attended school here in Canada within a system that was, as Emelie hearkened to, has been, built and founded in Indigenous erasure, in white supremacy, and all of these isms that intended to kind of homogenize our society. The intent of our education and the education that I had gone through was to minimize the quote unquote differences that non-white, non-male, non-heterosexual, non-disabled people had, because those are in a system that is founded in Indigenous genocide, that is founded in white supremacy, that is founded in Black marginalization. Any threat, any existence of someone who's successful, or any existence period of someone who doesn't fit in those identities is a threat to the system as a whole. So for me, a lot of what my own, navigation growing up, especially through my adolescent years, was this falling into the same system of, minimizing my different identities and kind of, drinking the Kool-Aid, if you might say, drinking the Kool-Aid of believing that Canada was great. I mean, we, as Emelie had shared, we rank 6th in the world for peace, but it's important to recognize that that only looks at external wars or external conflict. And to assume that Canada is doing fantastic would be to erase so many of the internal, local, national struggles for self-determination and liberation. We have Indigenous people who, right now, there's in our East Coast, there's a lot of pushback against the Mi'kmaq, so the Indigenous community of the East Coast, Salish territories. They have been given the legal right to fish and maintain fisheries along the East Coast. There has been a lot of racist pushback and actual removal of their self-determination for that land and for the maintenance of those resources. So to see how these things have been solidified within our policies in a way that's formalized has been so frustrating, and to recognize that each of us that have grown up here are part and parcel of that system is a really important way to approach what decolonization of peace means. Decolonizing peace means you need to also recognize decolonizing your own life and your own learning and unlearning what you've been taught to believe, or what you've been, whether that's been explicitly taught or implicitly taught, or what you've been socially conditioned to believe is the universal truth. For me in Canada, it was the universal truth that, compared to the place that my parents came from, compared to other countries in the world, Canada is great. But just because we're relatively better doesn't mean we are the best. And there's always, always, always space for more, space for better, for us to do better, and for us to recognize the systems that, while they may exist, that aren't working well for us, and to push for us to do better as we move forward. And doing better means tearing down the systems that we currently have and rebuilding ones that center Indigenous and Black people at the front of those new systems. So I'll kind of leave it there, and I look forward to hearing from the rest of you and to chatting more about it. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Moving over to Isatou Svenningsson. You represent the Swedish youth organization Tamam, and most of your work revolves around anti-racist methods and how to combat the racism that you face as they are organizing themselves in civil society. You're also the chair of the newly founded Afro Institution that aims to support Afro Swedes in Gothenburg, Sweden. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and also walk us through why you and your organization believe that decolonizing peace is so important and why we need an Afro institution in Sweden?
Thank you so much, and thank you, Aniqah. I think it's really interesting to hear the Canadian perspective, as Sweden and Canada is very often compared, and especially in our anti-racist methods. So thank you for that insight. My name is Isatou Svenningsson, as Emelie said, and I represent the youth organization Tamam. And we work with youths who experience or have an experience of an asylum process, and to help support them in whatever youth engagement that they want to take part in. That could be starting a football club, but also being a board member or a youth ambassador. Within that work, we have seen how youths who are racialized meet racism when they try to engage in civil society. And this is met by them trying to rent spaces and being denied. When someone with a Swedish coded name calls, the spaces are being rented out. They're being denied access to funds because of their names or their religions. They're also, as LSU have also shown, they're facing hate, a lot of hate crimes, and especially groups who are coded as Muslims or Black in Sweden. So I've, for the past year, worked with this group to map their experiences and the consequences of this, which is partly for the group, racism-related stress as a consequence of institutional and structural racism, but there's also the consequence of our society as a whole when we do not engage with youths who have solutions and have ideas on how to expand their participation in society, but also solutions on how to make it better when we see a lot of shootings and killings and youths being murdered in Sweden. As a result, I was also part of organizing the Black Lives Matter demonstration in Gothenburg, Sweden in June, as a result of both solidarity to the movement in the US, but also looking at Sweden and understanding our racial history and how we've been jumping from race biology to denial of race, where Sweden has been one of the forerunners of categorizing race. And now we live in a society where we've deleted race. So as a result, we held the demonstration in Gothenburg in June, and we were highly criticized for it, for doing it during a time of a pandemic. And our answer to that was, of course, that racism and anti-Black racism has been a pandemic against Black people for hundreds of years. Despite that, we were still targeted with threats. And that led us to create a think tank on what we want to create for ourselves in Sweden that is not only revolved around our trauma and the racism that we meet, but to create, we no longer want a seat at the table, as many of us has probably heard that quote, but we want to create our own table with our own systems, our own beliefs, where we can take up space and not have to limit ourselves. So for us, it has been really important to decolonize ourselves in that ways and to understand that we do not always have to organize on the basis of whiteness. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Isatou. And I just want to give reference to the data that you mentioned earlier. So the National Council of Swedish Youth Organizations do an annual report called EURIS, and it shows that 40% of youth activists in Sweden are met with some sort of hate and threat, and almost 20% have, because of hate and threats, refrain from getting involved or engaged or doing certain things in their youth activism. So those are quite alarming numbers in Sweden. And we're moving on to Pega Molana. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She is a human rights activist based in Europe, mostly focusing on the impact of armed conflicts on youth's human rights. Her advocacy work has been targeting the human rights body, the Council of Europe, and she is currently the chairperson of the Programming Committee on Youth. And her most recent work has been focusing on the role of environment in the maintenance of peace and the establishment of democracy. And I'm wondering, Pega, if you could take us through and describe a little bit what environment actually has to do with maintaining peace and building democracy.
Hi everyone. I don't know if you can hear me properly, but I'll see how far it goes. I'm really happy to be here because actually I've been spending a few months back in the Middle East, so I feel quite far away from Europe and maybe my mindset as well. So it's great to be with you and also with so many inspirational people so far, especially within our panel. So apologies that I could not really react, as in, you know, in physical meetings, you can really show your encouragement towards other participants and other delegates. But I can say that I really preached what you do. To be honest, what I do within Council of Europe is quite long, so I will just go to detail. I'm a young representative or let's say an expert within Council of Europe. And I basically advise them on what the needs of young people are when it comes to youth, peace and security. So let's say it's part of being a decision maker. And as much as Council of Europe is doing a lot of work when it comes to peace and security, we don't exactly have a recommendation paper like UN does when it comes to youth, peace and security. So with that document lacking, we tend to work very much closely to the UN resolutions. And so far, we have been mainly working on the implementation of the UN resolutions within our programs. As you may have been familiarized, we have Youth Peace Camp every 2 years where we get young people across Europe, not only Europeans, but also young refugees who have been fleeing away from conflict zones. So the discussions there are absolutely diverse and dynamic, and we've recently just finished that in June. But we also have established a Youth Peace Network for Europe, and we are especially funding them to do activities across Europe. So there's a lot of work going on when it comes to Council of Europe, especially because we link human rights, democracy, and rule of law as three components to ensuring a sustainable peace. So there's a lot of work going on. And we especially collaborate with the European Court of Human Rights in Strasbourg to make sure that their decision respects the diverse, or let's say, the quick change of how peace is sustained and how peace is troubled across Europe. So that is in a nutshell. And as you may know, Council of Europe is not the EU, and I need to really stress that out. We are not 27 member states, we are 47 member states. Including Russia and Turkey. So you can expect the amount of, let's say not troubles, but a lot of disagreements that could occur on what even defines as peace and what defines as living in a peaceful society. So we are, instead of working on, let's say, a direct collaboration on confronting violence and peace, we are mainly working on structural and what we call cultural building across Europe, on what peace means and also what young people need when it comes to supporting them. So that's in a nutshell. And we mainly work on no hate speech movement. I'm pretty sure you've heard of that. That is a Council of Europe project which has recently just ended. So through no hate speech movement, we've tried to combat violence that may occur online, physical, or even verbal. So that's one component of working towards a sustainable peace across Europe. But now we are actually working on providing a toolkit for youth workers that work across Europe on how to implement the UN resolutions, which comes about young people. So this is the most recent work we do. I'm recently taking over this role, and I'm a lawyer and an environmental lawyer. So my main focus recently at the moment in Europe is to look at how environment links to the sustainable peace. And as you may have a familiarity with, peace has 3 phases. It's before war, during war, and after war. This is how international law works. And what environmental lawyers have tried to do is to see how exhaustion of environmental and natural resources impacts these 3 phases of peacemaking. We have previous to that, we have corruptions, and we have exhaustion of natural resources, which end up going to a conflict zone. And how having natural resources as a resource to the war helps to maintain wartime for a long period of time, and how we can combat that. And when it comes to post-conflict, how we can make sure that environment is not being exhausted in a way that they would fall back into a war zone, and how we can basically make a cycle where environment is not being exhausted. So that is in a nutshell how we are processing the environment and its relationship with youth, peace and security. And what we can potentially say is that young people are also not only victims of let's say, lack of peace within a society, but they can also be perpetrators. But they can also be, let's say, perpetrators, victims, but also they can be the ones that cause the wartime falling back into a peaceful society. So young people are not just one thing that you can say they are victims and forget the other components. We need to change that dialogue, and this is what Council of Europe is doing. And most recently we've built a collaboration with the League of Arab States, which is going to be a long but very useful partnership to build when it comes to that. I apologize, I talked a lot, but I think I've summarized maybe, let's say, 50 years of work that Council of Europe is doing in few moments, and I hope that you've managed to understand it. But if not, I'm more than happy to explain further later on. Thank you, Emilia.
Thank you so much. Yeah, as you probably noticed with the time ticking down, we only have about 15 minutes. It seems like they have, we were promised 60 minutes for this breakout session, so there will be very little time for the discussion in the end. I'm really sorry for that. If someone feels like they still want to have their story or their recollection recorded, I recommend that maybe you copy paste, if you have something prepared, into the chat so that Alexandra can take that with her when we coordinate the minutes after this meeting. Ahad Shah, we're moving over to you now, and you are a graduate of the University of Pennsylvania in the US. You have extensive experience from supporting at-risk communities and international youth in the peace, environment, and also the policy sectors. You convene several teams of experts from around the world and develop programs around peace, justice, security, and the environment. Can you explain a little bit, what does a decolonizing approach mean when it comes to peace programming? What does it look like, and what difference does it make?
First, thank you for having me. I'm going to try to make this as quick as possible so we can move to the discussion, because I want everyone to feel included. And so deconstructing or decolonizing peace is, I feel peace shapes and turns out differently it has a different meaning for different cultures and different groups based on whatever context. And as such, decolonizing peace to me means it's the absence of ethnocentrism, it's respecting cultural relativism, and it is pursuing peace for the sake of shared community values versus self-interested goals. So that actually is how my projects appear also. They are not typically the people who I usually bring on, the different experts. They're not usually self-interested people. They are very altruistic and they have amazing personalities. I think that has been one of the only reasons, not one of the only, but primary reason I could do different projects. Like we did an awesome project in Brazil, in the Amazon rainforest, with youth, and we were looking at the situation that indigenous populations there face and how young people could help protect their welfare. So, but I could only do that because I met the right type of people along the way, very altruistic, kind, generous people, and I hope and I feel the youth will be able to be effective in the peace building sector and in the security sector if they meet the right type of people. From what I understand, from what I've heard, at the UN, sometimes there could be a toxic environment. And I've had some of the younger members of the UN come and ask me, oh, how should I handle this situation? This person saying this to me. And that was a little discouraging to hear. I do talk to them about how to become more empowered and the value of having a great support network. And I guess in the US, like I'm not sure what everyone's impression is of the US, but the minority community, at least for Muslims, I can say, they grow up in a very diverse community, and that makes it easier to grow up here for many of us, because we have such an awesome support structure. It's one of the benefits of being in a minority group, is that we have that tightness, where if somebody's struggling, we'll have somebody who can uplift us. Myself, for example, I went to an Ivy League school, but before that, I was a high school dropout because I didn't like the interactions that I would have with other people at school. So I had to overcome those challenges, but that only happened, again, because of the type of people I could meet along the way. So I hope that's helpful in some way.
Yeah, thank you. I think you're hitting both on like biases, showing solidarity, and creating not only like pushing young people to come forward, but to create an environment where youth can engage in a meaningful way. I had questions directed to the panelists, but since we are such a small group, that's the advantage of this session. So I would like to just put out these 2 questions to the whole group instead. So we'll have questions for everyone. Anyone who feels like they have something to say or a question or a follow-up can use the raise hand function, and then they will be given the floor by me. So the first question that I would like to share then with the group is what do you believe should be a consideration when we're taking in consideration the post-colonial perspective, we're designing actions targeting youth in our specific region? What considerations do we need to take to ensure that we are not just repeating colonial or harmful patterns? And then we have Daphne Frias. Welcome.
Hi. I guess this is more just a general response to everyone's amazing inputs. But I really think that in order to combat colonization and sort of decolonizing in general, a central theme that I've heard amongst all of us is dismantling systems of oppression, and the fact that the foundations of the society that we currently live in are built upon those crumbling foundations, and something that is very sort of significant characteristic of Gen Z is the fact that we sort of break away from those systems of oppression, and that we are very quickly becoming the most globally diverse generation in the history of our world, and that we embrace that diversity proudly and use that as a unification factor instead of a divisional factor. I think that goes back to some of our discussions within the main session, talking about technology and then talking about what peace means to us. I think something that's amazing about this young generation is that our definitions of peace are not individual. They're very homogenous, and we see our peace as the peace of each other. You know, I live in the United States, but I'm keen to lots of world conflicts. And like Isatu was saying, she helped lead a Black Lives Matter march in Sweden when the movement originated here in the United States. That's so clearly indicative of what this young generation is all about, where we are not defined by state borders, but we are defined by a common interest to dismantle those systems of oppression. And then going to Pega's point about environmentalism and peace, the climate crisis exists because of those same systems of oppression that our foundations are built on right now. And the reason why we're facing a global climate crisis is because the people who've perpetuated those systems of oppression want us to be in that crisis, because they benefit off of us being oppressed and us not being able to speak up. So I think it's incredibly important, and it makes me incredibly proud to be a part of this generation that we are working to dismantle those systems and letting people know that, you know, they're not sliding under the radar anymore. We're calling them out, and we're making sure that change is coming. And I think creating more global participation and really being able to collaborate more on North-South cooperation is incredibly important, so that we can expand our views of generational diversity. And overall, I'm just incredibly grateful to be here with you all, and grateful for your insights.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of the things that you're saying we can develop on these for hours. And I welcome that. Like, we should definitely like have that as a call to action, that we should at least prolong for the 60 minutes that this session definitely deserves. But the second question then that I want to throw out to the group is looking at solidarity. I know Isatu, you also talked about before this session with me how there's been like supporting marches also in other parts of Europe, supporting the Black Lives Matter protests in the US, and also what Daphne is mentioning, like how we can show support and solidarity with different movements and be united in our diversity. So I want to ask the group, what do we believe that we can, like, how can we develop meaningful youth engagement between the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere? What do we do today that we can learn from and that we can improve? And how can we also show solidarity with protesters outside of our region? So anyone who would like to just reflect, comment, or have a question about that can click on the raise hand function. Pega, you have the floor.
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question, simply because we can, for instance, show solidarity. I think for me as a British, I've seen a lot of times when there's something happening in the North America, London is always one of the first to go and march out and demonstrate. But what we have suffered, and as a British, I'm saying that, for instance, when there is news or, you know, on Facebook, you see the comments. What I've seen is that our community within UK often tend to be quite ignorant. And I think that is a poison that we always face when it comes to showing solidarity. There is always those who show solidarity, but there is always those who want to discourage it. If it was trending in America and Canada that all lives matter, be sure that it was also happening in Europe. So what I'm saying here is that these solidarities are working, but they are all defective for the same reasons, whether we're looking at Americas or whether we're looking at Europe. So what we see here is that activists need to work together across both continents to make sure that we both combat the same issues that we are facing. And I don't see it being any different in Europe as it is in America, unfortunately.
Thank you so much. I will, apparently the raise hand function doesn't work for everyone. I will give the floor to Aniqah. Aniqah,
Yeah.
welcome.
I'll keep it super, super brief. I think a big part of effective North-South cooperation is situating our privilege within the North, recognizing that it is and never was and never will be our place to go into countries in the global South and implement programming according to the way that we believe it is correct or the best. And I think this is something that white supremacist settler colonial systems have reinforced, is that the countries that are currently quote unquote successful economically, socially, democratically, whatever it is, are the ones that have the best practices that we can carry forward and should carry forward into other contexts. But that erases the fact that we built ourselves at the expense of the global South. So recognizing that, situating our privilege and understanding that the best thing that the global North can do to support the global South is to provide the resources and the platforms for people from the global South to lead their own initiatives towards self-determination, justice, and equity.
Well spoken. I can see a lot of people are nodding. So thank you so much for that last statement. And thank you to all of you who've been on the panel, everyone. Thank you.
No, I just wanted to say thank you to Aniqah really for what you were just saying. And I wanted to also raise that fact that we should not do the deeds of those who came before us in Europe and the North America, of doing the same or having the same colonial mentality of saviorism, because I think we also have to understand that in a way of class, or what's it called, citizenship, and how we also have some power, and those power imbalances needs to be recognized as well. So, and that's also within our countries that I can see that these things are. In Sweden, there's a lot of white saviorism, but also saviorism in a different way. So thank you for that input.
Definitely. I'm going to throw out another question then, since we have a little bit more time. And maybe we can go into like explicit like recommendations, both to the UN system or to our fellow youth activists or organizations. What can we do to enhance and support youth initiatives and initiatives targeting youth without repeating these colonial patterns? Do anyone have some more recommendations to offer? Daphne, you look ready. Your sound is not on though.
What I was going to say is that I feel like, and this is something that I've seen become more prevalent, especially here in the United States, where voices of privilege are often the voices that get to be part of organizations that create change. And I'm going to just very explicitly say, like, why are they the ones making or calling the shots? Like, they are not the ones that experience oppression, so I don't think that they should be the ones being able to say how we should fix it. But the reason why they've become the people in that position is because they've had a linear life path of having privilege. So I think a recommendation for the notes is, how do we provide sort of equal footing for young people in less privileged situations to be able to come into organizations and feel like they are at an equal level or have an equal platform to have participation amongst these organizations? I feel like oftentimes, and even myself, I'm in a lot of these conversations and I'm incredibly grateful to be in them, but there should be more Latina women in these conversations. There should be more disabled women in these conversations. There should be increased diversity. But it's not necessarily about having the access or the organizations created. It's about making sure that the same people are not inhabiting those spaces over and over again.
I can see Megan Doherty, you have not spoken yet. Maybe you would like to add something.
Yeah, I think a critical thing as well is that we don't always reach out to young people with an initiative, that we let young people have their own initiatives. I think young people have like really, really great ideas, and like Daphne was saying, it's about enabling young people to have those ideas and like take them for themselves without actually having an organization coming in and almost like teaching it or dictating it. And I think one of the critical things, especially for young people, is funding, and that will enable more young people from different backgrounds to get involved, and just ensuring there's access there, because I go to university and work part-time. So when I'm usually in these spaces, I do tend to see a lot of people who don't do anything bar that in that space, and it can be quite frustrating, because then you're just having that kind of echo chamber of similar voices rather than actually having people who it's directly affected by in that space. So yeah, that's all I wanted to add.
Thank you so much. We also have Alexandra, our rapporteur. Maybe you would like to share some of your thoughts, since we're coming to the real actual end of this session.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And I think that the key of this solution is the cooperation between countries. Because at the moment, I'm really scared about this very turbulent time where I see it in Europe, this very extreme tendencies, and also nationalist and populist tendencies, for example, in France, by putting France over the European ideas, or in Germany, where the right-wing party is gaining their votes that are against immigrants, or for example in America, by putting America first. Or we see also this big conflict between China and American economic conflict that can influence a lot of countries in a bad way, because they are also very dependent on this country by selling their products and having a places. And I think that we at the moment destroying the globalization, and by putting our interests first, and by putting also our production back. And globalization, in my opinion, it's also a peace, because if we create a dependence of countries of each other, and we have a prosperity growth and economic growth, so we don't need war and we have more peace. And I think that's why it's very important to create more new bridges, more cooperations between countries, more student, for example, exchange, also a specialist exchange, and to invest more in educational system, because it's the future of the new generation that will come, and especially in a digital area, a digital age, we can use more works just by having internet. And it's no matter if you're in Germany, if you're in Russia, if you're in Africa or Asia, we can give you prosperity, that you have enough money not to go on the street and to work. If you have some subjects in a school, for example, IT or something like this, that can give you a possibility to work in the future, just having internet. And I think it's also a very important aspect of this. And of course, to create the common understanding of each other by more cooperation. Thank you.
We will give let's see, it's 1 minute left. Each panelist could say just one or two concluding words that you think describe what the outcome of this session. Ahad Shah first.
Ooh. Actually, can you come back to me at the end? Let me think.
We'll try with Isa too.
Hello. It is difficult to summarize, but I'm very glad to have been part of this. And I would really like to see more talks, especially with the group that's been here. I think I would say what I bring from this is how to further create collaborations, but also how Sweden needs to look more, but how we need to take more ownership in understanding coloniality and doing that together with other countries as well.
Thank you. Aniqah?
just sharing lots of gratitude for all of you and hoping that we'll connect outside of here to continue our conversations.
Definitely. And finally, Pega, what do you bring with you from this session?
That we have a harmony of approach towards peace building, regardless of where we are. And I think that's precious.
Thank you so much. Did you come up with something?
Yeah, just to repeat what Aniqah said, I'm grateful to meet all of you, and maybe I might try to touch base with some of you.